Hello, podcast family. My name is Justin, and I'm going to be your grief financial officer on the journey that is the Currency of Grief podcast. This podcast is designed to share real life stories from real life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and all the intricacies that come with death, loss, and legacy. My goal with this podcast is to inspire you to have deeper conversations with your loved ones and family members around the fragility of life, to normalize family conversations around money and legacy, and to educate around the inevitable that is our mortality. I'm excited to be your guide on this journey, and I hope that you take away some valuable lessons from our guests and their stories. So without further ado, let's meet our guests. I'm honored and humbled to be joined with Kevin and Jeff Romer. They're our first father-son duo on the podcast. Kevin is the president and co-founder of the Mathew Forbes Romer Foundation, father of Mathew and Jeff and Alexis. Shout out Alexis. Jeff is the brother of Mathew and on the advisory board of the foundation tasked with growing awareness of this amazing cause to the next generation. Jeff is also one of my closest friends who I met at the University of Florida. Besides being the biggest Dolphins fans in South Florida, Jeff and I bond over honoring the legacy of our family members who we've lost. In college, we revamped our fraternity's philanthropy into Super Bowl API, a sorority flag football tournament that raised money and awareness for the Mathew Forbes Romer Foundation, as well as mixed camps, two charities that are near and dear to our hearts. I'm inspired by the Romer family and their story and wanted to bring them on this podcast to share it all with you. So, Jeff, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Justin. We're very big fans of you and all that you have done and all that you mean to our family. So thank you for this great opportunity. And you know, we appreciate the opportunity to share our story. I think, you know, as I reflected on our story here, I look at the two of you and I reflect back in time to when I was your age. And you know, out of college with unlimited opportunities and potential, and you know, inspired to achieve what, you know, and make a difference with my time in this world, and you know, and certainly ambitious. And as I went out and did, you know, everything I could with my career and with my relationships, you know, it all felt really great and it seemed too good to be true, right? I mean, just so many good things going on in your life, and you know, you hope it goes on forever. And I think the first message that we want to share in our story is you need to be prepared for the unexpected. Expect the unexpected, right? So things were going great. I had the opportunity to meet a beautiful woman and make her my wife, and we together moved from Baltimore, Maryland, where we first met, to South Florida, where I'm a native. And we were excited because we could raise our family near the grandparents, and so you know, we decided we wanted to have our first child. Our first child, Mathew, was born in 1995. And, you know, everything about him was wonderful. They said he was a perfect child at birth, had all of the right scores for a child, APGAR scores. And we were off and running. And again, building upon what appeared to be a really wonderful life that we had. Until about 6 months after Mathew was born, when things weren't quite right, and he was experiencing some conditions with his eyes which were not normal. We had him checked out, and the doctor said, "Oh, you're going to have to go and have a little bit of surgery on your first child." Well, can you imagine how traumatic that is? Your first child, and all of a sudden you have to undergo surgery. I couldn't imagine anything worse than that. Well, it was just the tip of the iceberg, because as we dug into it further and went for second opinions, we learned that there was a condition or a symptom associated with the eye that is an indication of a genetic disease or a family of genetic diseases that affect the brain. And so, as we dug into it deeper, we said, well, what do we have to do? We got our son retested. Now, when we went off to do our family planning, we wanted to be as prepared as possible. And there is things like genetic screening, reproductive genetic screening that can be done to see if you are at risk for having a child with a fatal genetic disease. So both Lisa Jane, my wife, and I had all the testing done, and we felt like we were well prepared, and that we were safe from having an affected child. Unfortunately, after fast forwarding, after about the 6 months, as we explained, we learned that Mathew was in fact diagnosed with a fatal genetic disease. And when we did further testing, we confirmed that. We also confirmed that we were carriers of this disease. The disease is called Tay-Sachs disease. Many people think it's a disease that affects one population, the Jewish population. That's a big misconception. It affects people of all backgrounds. And it's a family of rare genetic diseases that, when you look at the combination of all of these diseases, quite frankly, they're not that rare. So all of a sudden, our world got turned upside down. The first grandchildren for all the grandparents, our first child was diagnosed with a fatal genetic disease. And at which point we had to determine, well, what are we going to do about this? We seeked all kinds of answers about whether there was treatments or cures for this. And unfortunately, at the time, this was 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago, there was nothing available. So all of a sudden, we were overcome with tremendous despair, as you can imagine. What were we going to do? We had to care for a child. We didn't know how long the child was going to live. And so now you have this question you have to ask yourself. Am I going to completely immerse myself in this single challenge that I have and focus on it? Or am I going to try to balance things? And so we decided we were going to balance it by having another child. And by learning what we learned, we understood better about how to do proper testing and how to ensure that we were aware whether the following children that we'd conceive were affected by this disease or not, or quite frankly, even other related diseases. And fortunately, we were very excited to give birth to a gentleman who happens to be on the screen with me. So Jeff was our second child, and what was beautiful about Jeff is he brought a tremendous amount of hope back into our lives. So where we had this gauge of despair, which was the lever was all the way to one side, and then we had this new infusion of hope from Jeff, and it really helped us to balance our lives out again and to continue forward with the hope of a brighter future.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing that story up until Jeff's birth, going into the detail. But I so many questions, and the first thought that came to mind was when you got the news that Mathew needed surgery on his eyes, and then got the news that he was diagnosed with Tay-Sachs. And so what was that feeling like? And was there like a diagnosis of how long he was supposed to live?
Yeah, so the life expectancy for Tay-Sachs disease was 3 to 5 years. And we didn't know where we'd end up on the spectrum there, but and Lisa Jane did not want to immerse herself in all the textbooks to learn everything about this. I looked at it a little bit closer and understood what the journey was like. And it's not only that the life expectancy is short, but the quality of life is very difficult. You're dealing with children that are in and out of the hospital in intensive care, and as their disease progresses, even when they're home, they require 24-hour nursing. So these were the kinds of things we were learning, and at the same time trying to figure out what are we going to do with our with the cards that we were dealt.
Yeah. And you and Lisa Jane decided to have more kids. What was that decision like? And how was it balancing Mathew's diagnosis of having 3 to 5 years to live on top of basically 24/7 care or doctor's appointments, and maybe go into detail about like what the care was like, and then what made you have the decision, like come to the decision of we want to have more kids, like we want to surround him, and how was it like balancing that?
Yeah. So, not an easy decision, and not everybody comes to the same conclusion about how they approach it. There's no right or wrong answer, but we always felt, and we're the kind of people who always try to be as positive about a situation, and so you need to bring some array of hope, array of light into the equation, and that's what Jeff represented. Humorous story is, when we had both of them, living with us together, we were, before we brought nurses in, we were the caregivers, and we were able to do it. But there was equipment required to care for Mathew because of his breathing challenges, where you'd have to suction his saliva out with a machine. And then at the same time, Jeffrey was just, teething and needing a pacifier. So we literally were lying on a mattress, which was right on the floor because we had to be close to both of them. We had Jeff on one side, we had Mathew on the other side, and we would literally roll back and forth between putting the pacifier in Jeff's mouth and the suction catheter in Mathew's mouth. And with sleep deprivation, hopefully not getting them wrong and backwards, and and so on and so forth. But it was a very difficult time. But we felt like we couldn't have just been living a life where it was all dominated by despair. We needed to have a child who we hoped would be healthy. We did everything we could to ensure that he was healthy. And then as he reached milestones that Mathew was unable to attain because it's a regressive neurodegenerative disease, we celebrated those in such dramatic ways, right? So, and as I reflect, I share the feelings of what it's like to have another person in our relationship who was, who was dealing with such a horrible condition. But Jeff, I sort of I want you to reflect a little bit as to, as you first thought about, your recollections of your brother and what it meant to you. How did it impact you, and how did it feel when you saw that your brother was different than some of the other brothers that your friends had?
Well, first of all, the whole pacifier thing, I like that we pretend that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. Now I know where the separation anxiety comes from.
Yeah. Had a bad day at work and I go right back to dad. No, but it definitely took a little while to truly understand that things were different. So like I would go to school, and I remember when I found out, I got the news, and Mathew passed when I was in kindergarten. Like I remember my memory of that day and that week was me sitting in the back of the classroom on the computer, and it was like a desktop computer, and there were games on the computer back when people used to use computers, the olden days.
Desktop computers.
Now
we can't get away from them.
Right. But it was just a surreal feeling, because I felt like I was watching a world that was just like so detached from what I knew. Like I was sitting in the back of the classroom, and I was literally isolated, but I was also isolated in terms of the way that I could relate to my peers. Like everyone else is just thinking about what a normal 5-year-old would be thinking about, what snacks you're going to have, what you're going to have for lunch, what you're going to have for like what are you going to play at recess? Like I was also thinking about what my stat line was going to be at recess and how I was going to get to 6 touchdowns that day. But I was also thinking about, like, I'm the only one going through this, and I don't really have anyone to talk to about this. And Justin, that's why the work that you and I do with experience camps is so meaningful to me, because that's an organization dedicated to letting people not have that feeling, like letting kids not feel alone and feel like they don't really have someone that's going through it with them. So it was challenging. Like we had nurses in the house every day, and it took a while for me to understand that not everybody had nurses in their house growing up. Like it took a couple of play dates for me to realize that, like, okay, like I needed a larger sample size, and I realized, like, okay, it's been 6 play dates and no one else has nurses. I think that we may be the only ones that have nurses. And it was just a different world. And it's definitely shaped a lot of how I see the world now, and not necessarily a bad thing, but it was a little jarring just seeing I had to, over time, I embraced it as part of my identity, but I didn't really know what to do because I didn't have anybody else that was going through it with me. So it was interesting, but I wouldn't trade where I am right now and where the family is now. I think it's all brought us to a good place at the end of the day.
I want to dive into life after Mathew passed, but before Mathew passed, we're hearing the story of his birth and your mom and dad receiving the news, and then the surgery, and then the critical equipment, and then deciding to have more kids to give them the beacon of hope, Jeff, and then the sacrifices that they made as well, to sleep on the floor, hopefully in a nice comfy mattress, but on the floor, and balancing that with, I know, jobs and sleep deprivation. It couldn't have been easy. So as you reflect on that, how did you feel when your dad was kind of telling that story in background?
I mean, my parents are superheroes, full stop. It's incredible. I remember when my sister and I were growing up, we would always be the last kids to get picked up from aftercare because both of my parents were working full-time jobs and they were working late. And I remember that was annoying to me that I was the last one getting picked up. But like as I've gotten older and I realized just all the different responsibilities that have been balanced, first with Mathew and then ultimately with the organization tasked with helping kids like Mathew, in addition to raising a family and having full-time jobs, and just like just the consistency every single day of like, I never worried about, things happening in my family when, like, if I take a step back, this was a very difficult thing to work through. And it's given me a good perspective on like how I should raise my own family. Like, frankly, there's no excuse. If my parents were able to do what they were able to do, like, why can't I do the same kinds of great things? So I look to them as a model for myself. And I know that it wasn't easy for them. And I admire how they were able to go through the whole process and I think we came out okay.
Yeah, more than okay.
Wonderful.
Kevin, how old was Mathew when he actually passed?
He was almost his 8th birthday. So, So he had far exceeded the life expectancy of the
Wow.
Tay-Sachs disease, but he he was a real inspiring, determined young man. We had many a times where we would be at the pediatric intensive care, and the head of the PQ, as they called it, would take us down to the office. It was almost like going to the principal's office. You didn't want to go to the office because he was going to give you bad news. And he said he would take us down there. We go down and he'd say, "Well, you might as well prepare because Matthew's not going to be leaving this time. It's really, really bad, and he's none of his vital signs are in line right now, and it's really we're very concerned about it." And then a few days later he'd say, "Okay, we're going to be discharging him, so get your nurses back ready for him to return home again." And it was always he didn't seem to play by the rules. He didn't seem to want to give up until at the end when it was, and we didn't do very Herculean because we wanted to balance his quality of life with what the state of medicine was at the time and ensure that we struck a balance there. So, but we gave him really good love and support and care, and he lived longer than expected. But it was precious years, and we give people a strange answer. They say how Matthew's doing, and we'd say he's doing great. Now, when your reference of what is great is a different type of baseline than a normal child, then he really is. When he was stable, he was doing great.
Yeah.
And so, that's how we looked at life. I have one more story that I want to share that brings Alexis, our daughter, into this. And that was one of the last times that Matthew was in intensive care in the hospital. He was on the fourth floor. Lisa Jane was pregnant with Alexis at the time, and we were expecting. And Jeff had just been dropped off at home after his day at school, and the doctor again said to us, "Matthew is really not doing well. We can't calm him down. We can't stabilize him." Lisa Jane went upstairs with full belly and everything. We sat her down in a chair. We took Matthew out of the bed with all of his wires on that they were using to monitor him, and they placed him gently on Lisa Jane's lap and next to the belly where Alexis was. And if I can tell you that Matthew calmed down after literally like a week of them saying we can't get him back to his stable condition again. And then they took him out after sitting with mom for like an hour or so, put him back into the bed. Everything seemed to be calming down. We started to walk out, and they said, "Lisa Jane, you look like you may be going into labor. Maybe you shouldn't go home. Maybe you should go downstairs to the first floor where the maternity ward is." She went downstairs. I went back home to get Jeff and set up things with the grandparents. Came back, and Lisa Jane gave birth to Alexis. And then, like the next day and a half or so, they basically, not only did we not expect to take Matthew home, but we took Alexis, Matthew home, and Jeffrey was there to greet us. So all three of us reunited as a family and continued on this extraordinary journey that we were on.
Wow. So to backtrack a little bit, if you're not a numbers guy like I am, average life expectancy for someone with Tay-Sachs is 3 to 5 years. Matthew lived 8 years, so almost double the average. So just for anybody keeping score at home, I was going to say he's a fighter. Matthew's a fighter, but it sounds like he's a lover and like the ultimate family man. So if you were to describe his personality, if you could reflect on that time with him, how would you describe Mathew's personality?
So Mathew loved music. His favorite artist was Britney Spears. And when Britney Spears would get cranked up when she was just getting started, he would really perk up at the time. So did I, for that matter. But he loved chocolate, and I know Jeff carries on that legacy of loving chocolate as a tribute to Mathew. Mathew just loved to be touched, loved to be. It was hard for him to communicate. He really couldn't speak. He couldn't walk. He couldn't really sit up or anything like that. But he had a way of letting us know when he was happy, and he would laugh. And we have an annual celebration that we do for the Mathew Forbes Romer Foundation, which we call Sweetness and Laughter. And we call it that because Mathew would laugh, and he'd have sometimes these uncontrollable laughing spells, and it would make us all laugh. And so we embrace that as sort of the embodiment of who he was and what he represented and how he lived. And we carry that on with the work of the foundation. So, so that kind of tells you. And I think some of the best pictures where you speak about a loving family person was when Jeff, Alexis, and Mathew were sitting together in a little huddle on Mathew's bed, and they were all embracing. I think they were all family people and loving, and that's the way Jeff and Alexis are today too. So
yeah. And how old were you when Mathew was born, Kevin?
How old was I?
Yeah.
So I was 32 years old.
Okay. So I'm not far. We're not far off from that. And I could imagine that there weren't a lot of other young couples, young families that go through something like this. And so who gave you support when you needed it, when you needed support on the grief side or helping out with the family? Like who supported you during this time?
Well, certainly my parents and Lisa Jane's parents were great supporters, as was our siblings, the aunts of Mathew and uncle of Mathew. You're always alone until you find a community and realize there's other people that you can relate to, as you've done with experience camps, which is just a wonderful organization and a wonderful opportunity for people to find similar experiences that they're going through. So we affiliated with or became members of the National Tay-Sachs and Allied Diseases Association, which is the oldest genetics organization in the country. And they had many other families from around the world that were caring for or had cared for children with these fatal genetic diseases like Tay-Sachs disease. So there was conferences that you'd go to and you'd share experiences and medical treatments. What's interesting when you're dealing with rare diseases is you need to find people in the medical community that are open to learning from you as opposed to being the expert, because as rare diseases, there's not a lot of experts. So if they work well with you, they'll learn from what you're doing. They'll help you to make decisions medically based. And so you find people and you create a team that are going to support you. And unfortunately, the reality of it is there's some people in your life that just don't get it, don't relate to it, don't want to be involved in something as horrific and complicated. And those are people that may start fading away, and you start to find out, who are the most meaningful relationships in your lives, and of course, you double down on them.
Wow, you're 100%. I mean, I love that you said that, because some of the things that you that stuck out to me was you have to find a community of people who get it, because most people don't really understand what you're going through. So you found that through the national organization, and then you had to rely on your team. And it sounds like your close team was your family and extended family, and then there were people in your life who didn't get it and didn't understand what you were going through. And that's a shame. And that's another reason of this podcast, because we want to share the stories to make people understand that this is a thing. This is possible. Everybody's story is unique, and we should show empathy and at least try to understand. And I was excited for this because I knew there were questions that I had never asked Jeff or you, Kevin, about Mathew. So I was excited to be able to dive deep into that today. Another question that came up was, like, obviously you were around people who get it, right? You obviously had to go back to work during all of this, or work through all of this. What was that experience like? Were there people at work who gave you support, or was it really tough to navigate that? And this is probably before, like, the Zoom remote environment world, boots on the ground.
Very much. It is important that that your employer understands. I think as I've gone through my career, I do like to understand the personal well-being of my employees and what their needs are, to the point where you can be sympathetic and supportive of things, because things happen to everybody during their career. And so my employer at the time was Sensormatic. It was a large employer in South Florida here. The person who founded it, Mr. Ron Asif, was a very compassionate person, continues to be a very compassionate person in support of philanthropic efforts, and was really helpful in us and supportive of us in our personal needs. We would work, try to work our jobs. Your life's changed. You can't travel as much, obviously. You can't necessarily pursue the same opportunities in your career that you might have as you're balancing things. But we would have these episodes where Mathew would have to go into the hospital for 2 weeks at a time, and we would shut down. We would have to be literally immersed in his care at the hospital, and making very difficult decisions, and working through specialists and so on and so forth. There was no ability, and as you said, you didn't really have remote tools to see your email and stuff like that. So everything shut down, and they were just tremendously supportive of our needs. And of course, when you return to work after that, there's the emotional transition, but you're really loyal and appreciative of how your employer treated you, and you want to help do the best you can do, to the extent you can, obviously, while you're still juggling a lot of family challenges. So, yeah, it was a very difficult thing, and you need it. It really takes a collaborative, compassionate culture that you would have in your work environment to combine with your needs, and then being balancing and being respectful of the demands on both sides.
Yeah, it's so important, and it happens a lot. Jeff, do you have any comments on that? I mean, I know we've talked about work and job experience, and really it's as the companies continue to grow, we have, like, Jeff, you work for a massive organization with hundreds of employees. That personal feel of people who get it and want to interact with you, and want to really sympathize with what you're going through. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I've been fortunate to work for some of the best companies in the world in terms of not only their output and the products they bring to the world, and the great things they do for their shareholders, but also just the way that they treat their employees. Like, I think that that's from the start of my career, and maybe this is a generational thing talking, but I've always prioritized companies that truly care about investing in their employees. Professional development's one thing, I value that, but it's also caring about your employees. And there are some programs in place that reward volunteer work, and then reward community involvement and champion that type of giving back to the community outside of being a high performer in your job. Like, I think that that's such an incredibly valuable thing for companies to be doing. And I know that when I've gone and seriously pursued external opportunities, that's a non-starter if a company doesn't truly care about their employees, doesn't value community work and volunteer work. To me, it's a values thing. And I think that companies are recognizing that, and they're prioritizing those types of programs. And I think that's really exciting for not only just the way that employees are getting their benefits packages, but also just the way that we're thinking about work in general as part of our lives. It's very exciting to me.
Yeah, I think
awesome.
My research is, I'm hopeful that more and more companies are adding bereavement services to their benefits package, or they have a flexible leave for people who have experienced a loss, because Kevin, to your point, when you're and even you had to navigate this before Mathew died, for the 8 years that when he was alive and kind of undergoing treatment. It's a lot on your plate, and you need an employer who gets it and understands it. And there's a lot who do, and fortunately, I feel like I'm with one. And Jeff, it sounds like you are as well. But there's, I'm sure, a lot who don't and care about their shareholder value. So, would love to kind of make that change in the employer world. But transitioning a little bit, I guess I want to dive into the grief a little. Kevin, when Mathew officially died, how did you process that grief, and what felt right for you?
I think we were preparing ourselves for a while because of how long he lived and how many false alarms we sort of had with the expectation. It was a remarkably peaceful period for us. It was on a Saturday night. We were there with his nurse and the two of us. He had just been let out of the hospital for the last time, and his respiration was slowing considerably, and he was just very comfortable. And it really, and he told us that he was ready to go, and we were there, and when he passed, we called two people. We called his pediatrician, who was so great, and was always there to help us with through things. And we called the senior rabbi at our temple, Rabbi Singer, who was playing in a Saturday night softball league, temple softball league, and he came over to give us all hugs, wearing his softball uniform with a lot of red stains on it from where he had slid. So he went out there. He gave it a good fight on the field there, and then he went from that to just giving us tremendous warmth and compassion. And it was as peaceful an experience as you could hope, because he wasn't in pain, he wasn't struggling, and he told us he was ready. Right. Well, so we were like, well, what do we need to do, and how do we support him? And he told us many times he wasn't ready to quit, and then we just followed his lead. And the last time he said, "I'm ready to go," and it was very emotional and very hard for us to finally get there. But we were together as a family, and I mean, that was just a beautiful evening. Terribly sad, but beautiful at the same time.
Thank you for sharing those details and those feelings. Jeff, when did, asking it in a different way, because how old were you and when did you realize that all of this was happening, and how have you coped with your grief over time?
So I was in kindergarten when I found out. I mentioned the story about being in the back of the classroom, and I mean, candidly, I was pretty young for most of this, and I think that for several years after the fact, there was a little bit of guilt, where I felt like it didn't hit me maybe as hard as it might have hit my parents. And there was guilt when I wasn't thinking about him. Like I'd go stretches, and it had been a while until I like hadn't even thought of my brother in a long time, and it was like, that's crazy for me to not think about my brother. And that guilt kind of ate away at me for a while, because again, I didn't really have anyone to talk about it with, and it was like, what's the proper amount of time that I should be thinking about my brother who passed when I was in kindergarten? There's no playbook for that. There's no benchmark for, oh, you better think about him X amount of times a week. I mean, you could think about that with your own life. How often do you think about your own brother? And it's probably a lot. But then there may be weeks where you're really heads down with work, and maybe you're not talking to him as much, and maybe he goes to the back of your head. It's like, it's very hard for me as a kid, as I'm trying to navigate life and growing up, and who I should invite to my bar mitzvah, and all of the really hard hitting things that an adolescent goes through. And in the background, you're like, I need to be thinking about my brother more. Like, what can I do to honor him? And for my bar mitzvah project, I did, we had a fundraiser that supported the foundation and was in honor of Mathew. And my sister also did one of these fundraisers. And it always, in my head, it almost never felt like it was enough. Like I felt like I was trying to compensate for not like having that as such a crucial part of my everyday. And it was really hard for me. Like it was hard to know like how I could honor him and how I could just like keep going with my life when there was literally nobody else going through exactly what I was going through. So I was kind of just winging it. And over time, I found a good way to do it. And I've had good outlets. I've met more people that have kind of given me that community. But it's been a process.
Thank you for sharing that on the emotional side. There isn't a playbook. There's no playbook for how to navigate grief. And transitioning a little bit here, there's no playbook on how to like pick your life back up after something like this happens, after you lose someone you love. And Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, from a financial or money side, like there's really no playbook on how to navigate those medical expenses that you incurred and stuff like that. So I'd love for you to dive in a little bit about what was it like navigating the money side of this, like of Mathew over the 8 years. How did you do that?
Yeah. So, first of all, the expenses of caring for a child with, hospitalization requirements and 24-hour nursing is hundreds of thousands of dollars a year back then. And I'm not even sure what the costs are, for now, especially nursing has skyrocketed. So we were fortunate part of the benefits of both of us working is that we're able to have health insurance that was able to help us with the care for Mathew. But it's an interesting thing with health insurance. Health insurance is only usable if it's helping. And so we were constantly fighting battles to demonstrate that a child who is getting worse over, continuously getting worse and losing capabilities. He progressed to about maybe the abilities of a 9-month-old and then started regressing from there. And by doing what we did with physical therapy and all sorts of other speech therapy, which helps with the swallowing ability, because these children lose their muscles to swallow, which means they can't feed themselves. So they have to have feeding tubes to get nourishment. And, and you're doing all this, and then we're doing this ourselves, and then trying to keep him from getting pneumonia and other things that will cause him to go in the hospital. And of course, failing because it's impossible to keep up with it, going into the hospital. So each time we did this, we had to fight, not every time, but there were periods where the insurance companies would say, okay, well, let's look at your case again and see whether or not there is justification to continue to cover it. Now, we're fortunate to have insurance, but not everyone necessarily has insurance. Certainly, efforts have been made to expand the access of insurance. But if you don't, you're fighting battles with government agencies to help you to cover these expenses. You're seeking support from organizations that might provide grants to people that are out there. So the advocacy role for your family and your family needs is as consuming as the care itself, because if you don't have the resources to do it, you can't provide the care. So we were fortunate to be able to continue to provide care for it throughout his life. But it was constantly a battle. And the message there is you need to be aggressive. You need to advocate. You need to pursue every angle that you can. You need to tell your story. You need to make sure people appreciate what you're doing. A child doesn't get better from these diseases, but if you can stem the decline to the point where they're stabilized, that was our argument, because that treatment is making that child stable and have a quality of life. Without it, that child would decline and die aggressively. So I think people have to look at and understand what is the state of medicine at the time, what are the interventions that are possible, who can advocate with you and for you, and then you need to be aggressive in finding the best solutions and finding funding for those best solutions.
So just so we're clear, what I heard you say was like Mathew was never going to get better with the treatments. He was never going to fully recover. And every time that he underwent a treatment, you had to advocate, not using the word fight, but advocate on his behalf to the medical insurance companies to make sure that the payments were covered partially or fully.
Yeah, you had to get approvals, but also then there would be incidences where you'd have to ensure that you got approvals, but then there would be points where they would look at whether they're going to continue to renew the insurance from year to year. And so that was even a more strategic decision. And we would get together with a bunch of medical experts and they would evaluate Mathew and he would fail every test. That was as simple as it was. And we then had to take that portfolio of evaluations and make a case that there's a benefit in helping this child. And obviously, with the work we've been doing with the foundation, since then, there's more opportunities for intervention, and there's therapies that are in development that are changing the equation. But back then, it was pretty stark what you could actually do.
Yeah,
and I do want to kind of tie back a little bit to what Jeff was saying, because one of the struggles or the challenges that we faced was we lost a child, but we didn't want to lose another child or two other children. And by that, we didn't want them to not get the love they needed, to not get the opportunities that they needed as a child. People would say, oh my gosh, it must be so hard raising a child with special needs. And I would say it's probably harder to raise a child that's not affected, because their demands and their opportunities could be more of a load on you. And so we literally had to make sure, we had to continue to make sure Jeffrey was okay and Alexis were okay. At the same time, we're making sure that Mathew was doing as good as he could do. And, Jeff is the middle child in a family. That's a hard position to be in, when you have an older brother who had the attention and needs that he had. So,
and it doesn't sound like Jeff has middle child syndrome at all. So
no, I still don't know how to answer the question, how many siblings do you have? Because there's very few people that know that I'm a middle child when they know I have a younger sister. They don't know that I'm a middle child. And it's a very interesting nature versus nurture type of experiment that I've been operating under. Like, I am a middle child, but I've been operating as an older child. So run some tests on me. I'll be your guinea pig.
We'll go into that. I mean, that comes up when you go out on dates, when you meet new people, I don't know, holidays, like when you're in a foreign place and people are like, hey, like they're trying to get to know you, and they say, like, oh, are you the oldest child, or how many siblings do you have?
Yeah, it's such an innocent question, and it's a great question. It's someone's trying to get to know you and get to know what your family's like, and it's beyond the surface level stuff potentially. And initially I was like, I literally don't know how to answer that. Sometimes I would say, like, I have a younger sister. But again, that goes back to, I don't feel like I'm being genuine and answering that in the way that is true to me. So over time, I've actually leaned in the direction of probably what people would consider to be oversharing. Like, I will fully start to tell people, like, yeah, no, that's a bit of a loaded question accidentally. And then I'll be like, technically I have one current younger sibling. The answer used to be two. And then I depending on the relationship with the person, I will just start telling people about Mathew. And I have no fear of telling people about him and embracing that as part of my story. And I think that if I wasn't I still don't feel like I have a perfect answer to that question, but I think over time I've developed a better way of answering it. And I don't know. I want people to know the full me when they ask me questions about myself. And that's been a journey to just dealing with grief, is like dealing with how to translate the grief into the language of other people too.
Yeah, and it's part of your identity, and you made it. The two of you have made it part of your identities and your family's identity to honor Mathew's legacy. And I would say, not let him be forgotten, but really shed a light on what he went through and how he was such a fighter and a lover, and bring people together in this light. And so you've alluded to it a couple of times, but tell us a little bit more about the foundation, the early years, when it started. Kevin, I'll let you take it.
Thank you. Yes. So the foundation was started in 1998. So if you do the math, Mathew was still alive at the time. And, as a family that has gotten a diagnosis, you do everything you can to try to care for your child, and you have unlimited, energy and determination, and you'll do everything to find a cure for your child. Unfortunately, there was nothing even remotely available at the time. So with that same level determination, we figured, well, what outlet could we use to channel our desire to help to make this as positive a situation as possible. So we created the Mathew Forbes Romer Foundation in honor of Mathew. And we started with our mission being around genetic testing because, as we mentioned, testing was a challenge for us initially. And so we wanted to raise awareness about the importance of genetic testing and make it accessible to people so that they would participate in it, overcome misconceptions that only certain groups are at risk, and therefore getting more people exposed to that. So we started working on that. We actually worked with the quality assurance lab that oversaw all the labs across the world in making sure that they were certified for quality processes and running Tay-Sachs tests. And so we made videos to show them the proper process and distributed to them as an example. So that's where we were. And then as our resources grew with our foundation, we were able to raise more money. And by having more money, we could go from doing genetic screening to starting to work on areas like research, where the costs of research were much greater. And the idea was that you'd want to screen for at-risk families or potentially affected children, and then you'd want to introduce therapies that didn't exist. So we're really working on a continuum of solutions here that would help to transform the landscape compared to where we were. We had no quality screening at the time. We had no therapies. So we went off and started doing research, and we were able to develop some things like we found a correlation between Tay-Sachs disease, which is a rare disease, and Alzheimer's disease, which affected many people, both neurological diseases. And by drawing that correlation, we were able to get people who were more senior and maybe weren't thinking about reproduction to think about the importance of our diseases. So that was an example. Then we created, in concert with the national organization I mentioned, a national research initiative. And I was the original chairman of that. And we basically started the funding cycle with that. And since the beginning of that, we've been able to raise over $4 million for research, and over 70 different research projects have been conducted, up to and including getting therapies into children through clinical trials, which meant families were now having something that they could use as part of their fight with these diseases. Then we also recognized that while you're still trying to get these therapies approved, and even after you have the therapies, there's a tremendous need. If you remember, we talked about nursing. So nursing became such an integral part of our mission. And so we did nursing scholarships with all the major nursing colleges and worked on programs with them, educational programs, simulations where we actually simulated with simulated children that had electronic sensors and electronic feedback that would allow the nurses to learn how to care for these children that like our children, so that they could be ready once they were dispatched in intensive care units or at home. So those were our three pillars. We started that. And as we were doing this, we were, again, striking a balance between the full-time jobs, doing this, caring for the family, caring for Mathew. But it was, if you could have cured Mathew, we would have put everything into it. We put what we would have put into curing Mathew into the creation of the foundation. And it's been it's something we didn't know how long we'd be doing it for, but it's now entering our 27th year. And we continue to find important areas we need to pursue and expand our efforts. Newborn screening is an example, all sorts of different types of advanced therapies like gene therapy and other different relationships. And what is so exciting to us right now is the idea that, as we're aging as the founders of this organization, it's important that we understand where the needs of an organization like ours are going. And so we're in the process of creating the next generation of leadership. And I'm proud that Jeff is part of our leadership team that's in the next generation board. He's our creative director. And the way he approaches the programming and the promotion of the organization is so different and so beyond anything that we as founders could have imagined. And so what's beautiful is for us to step back knowing that the next generation of Jeff and Alexis and so many other of their contemporaries that, you know, who were introduced to this organization through their parents or even grandparents can now adopt the mission and transform the mission in a way that continues to build upon Mathew's legacy.
So amazing. Can you briefly share what the 3 pillars are?
Yeah, so it's genetic screening or testing, either one. Those are interchangeable terms, and the education associated with it. So that's where you try to understand the risks and look at prevention of these types of diseases. The next is research and treatments. So you're finding what are the potential treatments are out there. You're developing them through the drug development process and trying to make them available for use by patients. And then the last area is nursing care programs and the myriad of things associated with the nursing programs that will support family and hospital care.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of breadth. But what stood out to me was you kind of took on this advocacy role for your family during Mathew's battle against Tay-Sachs, and you were advocating against the insurance companies, but really advocating for support and finding community in this. And you've continued to play that advocacy role within the Tay-Sachs community. And you said you didn't know how long you'd be doing this. And now, what is it, like 26 years later? Here we are, another year under your belt, and now you're feeding into the next generation. So, I mean, what does it feel like to have an organization, Kevin, that is going to potentially go on for multiple generations?
Well, that's really a feeling of pride if we can do that, because the key here is, while the name was Mathew, it was named in honor of Mathew. There was a risk in doing that it would feel more like it was a family organization. It's a full public organization, and we want people to embrace it with the same passion that our family did, and we want, you know, the next generation to find the importance of what awareness we're raising and what work we're doing. And so, you know, if we can continue to transition across generations, we're doing the right thing. And I think that's a hard thing when you look at creating anything as a founder. Sometimes it's hard to step away. I've never felt more excited about stepping back, not away, but back, and supporting where this could go. Because, quite frankly, you guys both used the term playbook. There was no playbook when we started this thing, and there is no limits as to where it can go. I think focus is important so that you get work done and accomplished, but adapting it to the evolving needs is what's really great about it. And I get so excited when I see how Jeff and his generation are doing different things with this platform and this brand that we've created.
Yeah. Jeff, what was it like to know growing up that your family had this organization, and how have you talked to your parents about it? or what was the feeling that you got when you went to the annual event in honor of your brother and to raise awareness, advocacy, and funds for to battle this disease?
Yeah, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, there was a period of discovery where it took a while to realize that not everybody had a family foundation. It sounds crazy to say, but it didn't hit me right away that not everybody did that, and not everyone embraced charity the way that our family has over the years. That's to say that my involvement with the foundation has not always been where it is now. It's over time I've learned more and more about, what is Tay-Sachs? What are some of these other diseases? And what is the foundation actually doing to support with all of the dollars that are being raised, and where are the dollars being invested? And it's been really cool over the years to really get a sharper understanding of the foundation's mission and the work that's actually been done and the work that is going to continue to get done. Because ultimately, if I'm going to be a part of this and moving this thing forward, I have to understand the history, and I need to understand the direction and the resources we've been able to pull together, the relationships and the partnerships that we have. And we have some great partnerships, tremendous partnerships. Some have said the best partnerships. But it's been great to learn more about it, and doing things like my bar mitzvah project were the beginning, but then, you and I working together on Super Bowl A pie, bringing that, we just started from zero on that, saw an opportunity, and we raised, it was a really successful event. And that was something that we were able to do to support the foundation. And I do experience camps, but also in a way I do it for the foundation too. There's a lot of ways that I've tried to give back, and it's exciting to think about. Some of this next gen programming is designed to give it a lot more longevity than the great base that's already been built.
Amazing. And it's become part of your identity, your family's identity, and it's something that you do together, which is so beautiful. And to, I guess, bust some truths here, Kevin, Jeff, do you have to have like tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars to start a foundation, a family foundation?
Yes, you do.
Oh, cool.
We will edit that one. No, in fact, I still remember, when you start a business, you put your first dollar of revenue that's up on the wall. It was quite a long time till we started raising in the thousands of dollars, because originally we went into this really feeling like we had to do work before, because the work was so critical, and let's just find ways to get the work done without raising money. But then we started realizing we got a story here, and we could raise money, and it went from hundreds to thousands. Now we're in the millions of dollars raised that we've been able to use, and I think a key part of it is partnering and sharing visions. There's a lot of people that want to do well, and sometimes organizations can become competitive because they have overlapping missions. We never look at it like that. We look at it as, how can we together create something that neither of us could do individually, and do it much more cost effectively. So we've really been able to extend our donations, but we're very proud, Justin, you as a person who works with the investment community. People expect a return on their investment. We treat this the same way. What is going to be the return on your donation dollar that is going to make a difference? And so we work very hard to educate people as to the value that their dollars are bringing. So, and I do want to say this, because Jeff and both of you mentioned it, when you were at API together, and I was, Lisa Jane and I were able to come up and see that program that you put on together for the Super Bowl. It was so well done. It was so professional. When you guys were speaking, we were so proud of the way you handled yourselves, your composure, the videos that you made, the fun, the enjoyment. It became an event that people look forward to. And it was, when we saw things like that, and that was sort of a precursor of the great work that you both are doing as you continue to pursue your own, your own ways of doing charity and philanthropy, such as experience camp. So,
Yeah, that's such an amazing point that you took out there. Was like, this stuff is fun. It's so fun to work together with Jeff, you and I, or me and my family, or you and your family, to put on an event to honor someone's legacy. I mean, like, video games are fun, or going to the beach is fun, or playing golf is fun, but this is like next level stuff. And so, go like, it's one of my favorite mantras is, the more you put in, the more you get out. And if you put, like, by putting in hours, years of effort into something like this, and then to go to the event and have people come up to you, and Kevin, for you to say this years after Super Bowl API, it makes me smile. It brings a smile to my face. So thank you for saying that.
Mine too.
Talk about, I guess, Jeff, what have you seen? Well, I'll both of you. I mean, when Mathew was diagnosed, Tay-Sachs, it was this incurable disease that he was diagnosed with. And so how has research and therapies around Tay-Sachs, how has it progressed?
So we haven't cured the disease. What we learned is we thought we were on the course of curing a disease, because the way a genetic disease occurs is you have a defective gene, and if you fix the defective gene, you fix the disease, and then the downstream functions of the body work properly and you're healthy. Simple enough, right? So we looked at a lot of different therapies that could have made a Tay-Sachs child feel better, and we worked on a lot of them downstream, but also we said, let's go to the gene therapy and let's see if we can fix the gene and cure the disease. So we were successful in getting a new gene into the human body. We were successful in getting the gene to produce the products that you need to produce to have normal working cells. But part of the challenge is the severity of these diseases is that when you go to try these on a child that's already very badly affected, the ability to maybe stop the progression of the disease can occur, but you can't necessarily reverse the consequences of what damage has taken place. So we've had a lot of children go through trials, and they've had various levels of outcomes. And what we've learned is what is considered success. And we've spent a lot of time with families and a lot of time with the Food and Drug Administration to define what are considered good clinical outcomes. And we have had good progress, but we haven't achieved what we need to achieve. We haven't cured the disease, and we haven't gotten the outcomes that we need to get to really make for as normal quality of life as possible. But that is the challenge, and that's the progress of drug development. And we're so excited about the amount of progress we've made. Just as we have a next generation board, we now have a next generation of gene therapy that we're going through development with, that was based on all the learnings that we had. We feel it can be even more impactful. So we're looking at gene therapy, we're looking at stem cell therapy, we're looking at enzyme replacement therapy, we're looking at all sorts of things that go through the blood-brain barrier and help to bring therapies into the brain. So as drug development is, you develop a pipeline and a portfolio, and when you look at cancer treatments today, for instance, Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 different types of treatments to fight against a cancer diagnosis, and we're attacking it the same way. So for rare diseases to make the progress that we've made, we've come a long way, but we're not where we need to be for the families like ours that would say, you know what, give me that drug. I'm going to pop it in and move on with my normal activities. We're not there yet. That's why our mission is still so critical.
Yeah. And why should someone get tested? Genetic testing.
So genetic testing is about understanding your risks. So if you are, every one of us carries at least 5 gene mutations for diseases that can result in an offspring that is affected. Now, some of these are what are called recessive genes. So you have to have both parents contribute an affected gene, and some of them are dominant or primary, and therefore just one copy will result. So when you're planning your family, you want to know what is the risks that you're going to have. And once you know the risks, and you know that you're at risk of having a certain type of disease affected child, there's ways to test in utero to see if the child is affected. There's opportunities for some newborn screening that will help you. And the key here is, no matter what you decide, and there's obviously certain decisions that may be more acceptable for people than others about how you handle that information. Having the information gives you power, and you can decide whether you want to intervene, whether you want to have a child, whether you want to adopt a child, what you want to do based on the risks. But without that information, you're flying blind, and it's so essential that you know it, and you know it as early in your planning as possible. You don't want to find out when you're so far along in your pregnancy that all it does is create stress and uncertainty and limits your options. So that's the importance of screening, and a big part of what we're doing. For instance, we're going to be doing a walk run in January where we will be reaching out to that next generation of people that we're talking about. And we're going to be making available genetic screening at the event so that you can either learn about it or actually, because it's saliva based, participate by spitting into a tube and getting your screening done for you and your partner. So,
and I know in our prep call for this, you asked me if I was going to get genetic testing, and I committed to you to do that. So I will get my genetic testing done.
I didn't ask you if you were going to get it. I said, what time and date are you getting it?
You're my accountability partner. I love it.
Thank you.
But that data, that information is so valuable to know and understand. And so thank you for sharing that.
And by the way, when we talk about screening today, when we were planning our families, initially we could test for Tay-Sachs disease. Then soon after, it was up to like 4 diseases. Then it became 18 diseases. Today, it's over 250 diseases that you can test for.
Wow!
With one spit. So it's pretty amazing.
Wow. Well, that's so much progress, but like you said before, the job's not finished. You're not exactly where you want to be. So, Jeff, what's next for the foundation?
So when we think about this next gen programming, part of the idea is to look at this young adult cohort. So Gen Z, maybe the younger millennials, and think about like what do they value, what do they need, and there's a very big shift in this generation towards a focus on health and a focus on wellness. And we spent 26 coming on 27 years focusing on the disease, genetic brain diseases. And part of the way that we can build awareness in the next generation is to build programming around the idea of health, and more specifically, the idea of brain health. So ultimately, the mission of the foundation is unchanged, but the way that we may introduce this next generation, I consider them to be like the emerging families, people that are going to be either they're starting families now or they're starting families in the next 5 to 10 years. This is the group of people that, we're 27, 28 years old. We're not the 32-year-old with the Tay-Sachs kid, but there's a chance that someone that we know, it could be us, like anyone has that in their range of outcomes. And if we can get out in front of that and we can introduce them to the community through programs tailored to brain health, which right now they may be more focused. They may think in terms of, I use a lot of technology. I use a lot of social media. Maybe I'm not doing things for my own brain in a way that is beneficial to my own health. We don't see the brain in our everyday. The brain is inside of our heads. It's not an organ that we see regularly. So we may not think about it and think about the things that we're doing to it, but we're putting together programming that's designed to make people think about the brain and ultimately drive the conversation back to, this research that we're doing around these genetic brain diseases. So the programming is manifesting itself in a few different ways. We have this 5K, the Brain Health Hustle, that's happening in Boca Raton in January, and that'll be our gateway. I'm doing a 5K in January, and then I'm going to do a half marathon in March, and I intend to do the New York Marathon in November. I'm calling it now, so I'm ramping up into that. I'm calling my shot now. That's happening. That's my schedule. But the idea is, that's there's this big movement in the running community among, the 20s and 30s crowd. A lot of people are making friends and socializing through run clubs. And if we can provide an outlet for people, coming right off of a New Year's resolution, and they say, I want to go and I want a healthier lifestyle, and I want to go and be more active. This can be a way to help people with that and introduce them to a community of people that also feel that way. And, oh, by the way, let's start to introduce them to some of our programming. Like, let's allow them to get tested, and let's start to educate them before they need to really act on it, because it can sometimes take people a few years to really take true action. And if we wait until they absolutely need it, it could be too late. So the idea is to get out in front of it. And we're doing programming in South Florida. We have programming in New York. We launched a chess club called Brainwave Chess Club, near and dear to my heart as a chess guy. But it's been great. We have some great partners up there that we've been working with. Shout out to Stripes, big fans. But it's been an opportunity to just build community around people. In that case, it's chess. It's it's one of the oldest brain games in existence. Kids are playing it. 80-year-olds are playing it. You can go to the park and play a crazy person who's the greatest chess player you've ever seen. There's anybody can play it. You don't have to be the best in the world at it, but it's also a great game for your brain and for thinking and for pattern recognition. And it's just an opportunity to, again, recognize how important the brain is and call back to the foundation and the mission that we have around protecting the brain and, ensuring that we have healthy brains for these kids that are afflicted by the diseases.
So it's programming around flexing that brain muscle. Like, I was in the gym today, squatting, flexing the glutes, 1 rep max squat, but playing chess, like not being on our cell phones and communicating, and running and challenging ourselves. That's all part of brain health, as well as getting tested, getting the genetic test done, and being proactive as a young family, emerging family, to gather the data that's necessary to make your family and life decisions.
Right on.
Amazing. So we're wrapping up here. So what's the date? First off, what's the date of the running, the 5K, and what's the name of it again?
It is January 12th at South County Park, Boca Raton, bright and early.
Oh yeah,
it is the Brain Health Hustle.
I love that.
And the logo is this fun little multicolored brain with legs running very fast.
Yes,
hustling, you might say,
and a headband.
And a headband, yeah.
And if you show up, Jeff might be wearing the brainwave costume while running the 5K.
I need a brainwave costume. I do need one.
As we leave our audience here, Kevin, wanted to turn it over to you. Were there any financial or logistical resources you wish you had? And then what advice would you give to another family who's listening to this, maybe a 32-year-old couple whose kid was diagnosed with Tay-Sachs? What advice would you give them?
So, regarding the financial resources, I think it's important that you do thoughtful planning as a family for what you foresee as the needs, but then make sure you're developing a plan that's going to potentially provide a safety net for those things that you don't anticipate. You want to be strategic in your planning, and you want to find ways that where you would work with somebody like what you do, Justin, where you can sit down and understand what a family, what their current needs are, what their long-term goals are, and then in between, what are the risks that you have to plan for and manage, or try to manage. Again, it's not really planned for. And so having a good system that does that really helps out a lot. I think at the same time, what we also have done with financial analysts and wealth managers in the past that's important is having people that are potential benefactors understand the importance of how you could be a part of their portfolio with regard to charitable savings or donor directed funds and things like that, where they can really invest and grow and then contribute to the work that are being done by organizations like the Mathew Forbes Romer Foundation experience camps and other great organizations that are out there. So I think it's real important that we plan not just for having a simple and enjoyable life, but for the things that that you can never anticipate, which we certainly didn't anticipate when we embarked on our family. So and so I would say that about it. I would say love the people around you, develop meaningful relationships, because we all need each other's support, right? I mean, Jeff just lost his grandmother, and the friends and family and community outpouring of that was extraordinary. And it's those kinds of relationships that really matter at the end of the day. And so I would say, really, really try to love your family, build your family, but also be a part of a community that will also care for you and love you. So I hope what we did today in some small way helped people that are out there that are just getting started. I hope we left you with a positive and exciting feeling, not a feeling of anxiety or uncertainty, because I mean, life is about finding opportunities and making the best of them. And so for those of you that are young and just getting started, all the best, lots of love and happiness to you. And for those of you that are, my contemporaries, we got a lot of fun left. We got plenty of pickleball and basketball left in our repertoire. So
oh yeah, But I mean, it is such a positive note because, like, look at what you've built with this foundation. Look at the process, the progress that you've made since for the last 26 years. And so it's just absolutely incredible to see, um, and to witness and be a part of. And that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because it is an inspiring story. You've taken Matthew's story of a 3 to 5 year life expectancy, living 8 years, and now his legacy is going to live on for generations. So thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast.
It's really our pleasure. And I think what I enjoyed most about this was hearing Justin lead us through this, which shows what kind of leader you are, and Jeff sharing stories that are fresh and new, even though we've been through so much together. As you continue to internalize and process what you've been through and where it's taking you, it's a joy for me to hear you speak about it, and I'm just excited for our future. Looks bright because of the two of you guys and many others like you guys. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you for those kind words, Kevin. Jeff, turning it over to you. Do you have any grief mantras or words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience with to help them battle or navigate their grief?
Don't be afraid to share. Don't be afraid to tell your story and find your people. That's been a big mantra for me in my life, is just find my people. And I prioritize that over almost anything else. Is like, is this my kind of person? Because you can't teach that. Like someone who's, you find your tribe. I think we look at the world in general. I think that there's a little bit of a fracturing of that, the tribes that we used to have as humans. If we start thinking about like mankind, I think finding your people and finding your tribe is the best piece of advice that I can give you. It's helped me get through a lot of this stuff, and yeah.
Oh yeah.
Finding people like you and through all the stuff we've done together has been pretty cool.
Wouldn't have it any other way. So speaking about finding your people, if somebody wants to find you, the two of you, and the work that you do, how can they find you? Jeff.
What's it, Jeff?
I guess I'll take this one. You can follow us on your favorite social media platforms. You want to follow us on Instagram, it's Mathew Forbes Romer Foundation. If you want to follow the next gen programming, you can follow brainwave.chess. You also have the traditional mfrfoundation.org. If you want to go check us out, check out the website, learn more about what the upcoming celebration is going to be celebrating. Why are we so into Neil Diamond for some reason? We love Neil Diamond.
Absolute classic.
Absolute classic. We love Neil Diamond. You could learn about previous programs, some of our honorees, some of our programs over the years. If you want to learn about partners, I mean, really, I would go check out the website if you'd like to just go down a rabbit hole, because who doesn't love a good rabbit hole? And just go educate yourself. Don't be afraid to get tested. It's not a bad thing to get tested. If anything, it gives you peace of mind to know, like if there's a risk, it's good to know about the risk versus not having any idea and then getting surprised. So, take advantage of the resources of foundations like this one, or if there's similar ones, there's a lot of great work being done out there. But mfrfoundation.org, at Mathew Forbes Romer Foundation on Instagram, and at brainwave.chess. If you're a chess person in New York, please come. I will be playing you, and we'll 1v1.
And we'll see who wins. But thank you so much. Everybody who listened to this podcast is a winner in my book. And I just appreciate the two of you, the work that you do, and everything. Yeah. the spirit and joy and love that you bring to our community. So thank you very much. And we'll see you next time on the podcast, family.